The Tanzania Revenue Authority met with Meta Platforms Incorporated executives as part of the government's intentions to impose a digital services tax on large technology firms. Last year, the Tanzanian government suggested that digital companies such as Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Apple, and all other social media platforms be taxed, claiming that they earn a lot of money in the nation but do not pay taxes. Now, the Minister of Finance and Planning, Dr. Ngigulu Nchemba, on the other hand, said that the impending levies on international social media firms will have no impact on consumers. Meanwhile, you will recall that we told you a while back on the program that Kenya's National Treasury is planning to raise the digital service tax from 1.5% to 3% of the gross value of online transactions starting from July 1, 2022. So despite community uproar, the tax went into force on January 2, 2021. Nigeria and South Africa are two other African nations that levy the digital service tax. And so our focus today is on Tanzania's plan to also introduce digital service tax. This is Business Edge. I am Lekan Onabanjo, standing in for Tolulope and Balogun. You're welcome. Joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Aly Khan Satchu, an Africa Geo-economist, macro analyst, and CEO, Rich Management. Big title for a big man. Thank you so much, Aly Khan, for joining us on the show once again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's get down to the details of our discourse for today. Now, Tanzania is about introducing digital service tax. Now, has Tanzania set a timeline when this will actually come on board? Has there been a proposal, so to speak, of when these digital tasks will actually start?
So I don't think there's been a firm date, but clearly it's on the radar, and I think we're talking about less than 12 months. I think, the Tanzanian government there's a new Tanzanian government, a fresher face, more inclusive approach. And I think this is part of their new philosophy, is to sort of float the idea to get some conversation going before they push it through. So I expect it to be pushed through relatively quickly in less than 12 months, probably less than 6. And I suspect Tanzania will stay in line with the global norms of about 1.5%. As you know, the president is on a 2-week tour in the United States. I'm sure a lot of these big platforms will be lobbying her, and I'm sure she's going to take their interests into account as well.
Well, you said that you are optimistic or hoping that Tanzanians will fall in line. But what about Tanzanian youths? Let me roll out the statistics. Now, according to UNICEF, Tanzania has one of the world's fastest growing young population. That's people's population. Of the estimated 60 million people in Tanzania, more than 50% are under 18 and over 70% are said to be under 30. Adolescents form over 12 million of the overall population of nearly 60 million people in Tanzania, according to statistics. Now, people are saying now, looking at this huge population, don't you think that Tanzanian youths might just not support this new move coming from the Tanzanian government, that it might pitch the youth against the government?
No, I don't think so. I think as long as they stay, they stay in line with the norms that I was speaking about, and they continue to open access to the internet and support the digital economy, which is going to create a lot of opportunity for this group that you've just described, I think they're okay. I don't see any pushback from the youth. I think what the youth are looking for is a level playing field and opportunities. And I think if the government embraces the digital economy appropriately, I think, if anything, you'll find the youth supporting them. I think, you go back to things like the increase in the mobile money tax, which was a poor decision, poorly implemented, and regressive. I think what we're seeing now is a more open government, open for discussion, and seeking to move forward collaboratively with all the different stakeholders, of which the biggest stakeholder is the Tanzanian youth. So no, I don't see a significant pushback. And I think there's a big opportunity to accelerate the digital economy in Tanzania. I think for a long time they've actually been a bit slow off the draw in this particular situation.
Well, yeah, the Minister of Finance and Planning said that the impending levies on international social media platforms by the reason of introducing this new digital tax would not impact the consumers, which means that they would not be subject to paying more. But do you think that would be true? Do you think that is true? Because over time, we've seen situations in other countries where when VAT is increased, then that falls on the cost of production, whereby consumers would have to pay more, for the price in production. But so do we see that happening, or truly that will not fall back on the consumers?
Yeah, that's a good comment to pick up on. And I think, the Tanzanian government still has remnants of the Nyerere type thinking that somehow you can control prices by government diktat, and you can't do that. And we've seen a number of instances where they think they could. So I think, look, what he's trying to do is get these big social media platforms to absorb some of the cost, but the reality of capitalism is, unfortunately, it's going to land on the consumer in the long run, and it's not possible to dictate how these big monopolistic companies price their products. So I think he's being he's being sensitive to the nuance that costs shouldn't all land on the consumer, but ultimately governments can't interfere in this way because it just doesn't work, as we know, all over East Africa. But there's been, significant trend of trying to control prices, which has been largely unsuccessful in the region.
Now, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa have developed some sort of digital tax system and reforms. Now, why did it take Tanzania so long to come up with this option?
I think in Tanzania's case, obviously, you had, the succession post President Magufuli. I think, this wasn't top of agenda for Magufuli's government. Magufuli was, focused on the election, seeking to throttle access to the internet in many respects, not really embracing the new digital economy. And I think you've now got a fresh face, new president, and a much more ahead of the curve approach to the whole thing. So I think, it's as simple as that. You just didn't have senior policymakers invested in the digital economy in the way the current president seems to be invested in it. Obviously, the more you embrace the digital economy, the more you've got to embrace free speech, conversation, and I think this is a positive direction that Tanzania is going in.
All right, now, Aly Khan, let me quickly ask you this before we go on a break. Now, there are hints. Do you have any hints about what rates Tanzania would charge for this digital service tax? For Kenya, it's said to be reviewing about 1.5%, 1.5 digital tax, as it were. So what do you think Tanzania would be pegging its own rate at?
Yeah, I think, in Kenya's case, I don't know if you realize, but in the budget, it seems that they've tried to bump up that digital tax to 3%, which I think was wrong, an error, a poor policy decision, and I think will be reversed because Kenya is seeking to be a digital hub in the region. We've had the likes of Microsoft set up here, Google. This is a regressive to increase that tax in the manner that it was done. So I expect that to be reversed. Here in Tanzania itself, I expect them to stick with 1.5%. I think they want to compete more aggressively in this space. And, the lesson number one of competition is don't price yourself out of the market. So I suspect Tanzania will be at 1.5%. I think people can live with that. It's considered fair. And I don't expect Tanzania to throw us a curveball at this point in time.
Quickly, before we go, Ali, how big is the digital economy that makes it very attractive for governments to want to plunge into, most especially to generate tax for the funding of governments and generation of revenue? How huge is it?
Well, I think in absolute terms, if you look at countries' GDP, you're looking at sort of 4 to 5 or 6% of the GDP of African countries, up to probably 12 to 15 at a maximum. If you throw in things like, telecom, then obviously it's a much bigger segment, but it's very fast growing. It's probably the fastest growing component of any country's GDP, and it has the potential to grow even faster. So this is the real cherry on top of the cake. And what you want to do is get more cherries before you start, taking them off the cake. So it's a double-edged sword. You can see it's growing fast. You can see there's a big opportunity. You've got to nurture it and let it accelerate before you start milking this cow too aggressively.
All right. So, Aly Khan, you just stay with us for a while. I'll be back with you. Now, according to the Minister of Finance and Planning, Dr. Nwigulu Nchemba, the new digital tax comes as the government is looking for new sources of revenues to finance its 114.8 trillion shillings. That's about $49.5 billion US dollars 5-year development plan. And will this bring about improved investments in critical sectors of the country's economy? That is the question so many people are asking, and that is one of the questions we get to ask our guests on the show today. So stay with us. We'll quickly go on the break. When we return, of course, the conversation will continue. Tanzania is about introducing digital service tax, and still with me on the show is Aly Khan Satchu, an Africa geo-economist and macro analyst, and of course the CEO of Reach Management, and we have been discussing this particular issue. Well, I recall, Aly Khan, you talked about the fact that digital economy is a big gold mine that is growing, it's burgeoning as we speak, but there are some skeptics who think that it might bring about harm for the digital economy, most especially in Africa, when you introduce this sort of tax. If you're going to allay the fears of skeptics, how would you defend that particular notion?
So let me describe what I see as the downside of the current architecture of the digital economy. Most of these mega platforms or Uber platforms are foreign-owned. We have not indigenized these platforms. So the actual ownership is outside the continent, and they are sucking up a lot of our cash, which, given the current scenario, we desperately need. So if you're going to criticize, what we've been discussing, it would be, I think, around questions of ownership and how do we compete as a continent with these Uber platforms, and how do we create our own platforms which then can retain the money on the continent? That's what I consider a big challenge. And then also, I think a lot of these platforms are kind of remote control management. And when we have very fraught elections, when we have issues like that, they're not able to adjudicate fairly in those environments. And I think you see that in the problems in Ethiopia. India is probably another good example where we've had all kinds of out of control conversations going on with very little control. So that's where I would criticize it. But I think, we've got to live with the situation as we find it. We've got a very dynamic young population on the continent. We can't cut them off from this phenomena, which is also, by the way, creating huge opportunities for our young people. I mean, there are numerous stories now of cash being raised in this space, a lot of money coming into it, a lot of value addition being created. And I think any country that seeks to cut itself off is going to suffer terribly. Tanzania, of course, has got a tremendous other opportunities as well. The gas is in high demand. Their minerals are in big demand, particularly for the electric car revolution. So I think it's for the Tanzanians, it's about sequencing everything and making sure you pull it all off it's a little bit like conducting an orchestra, I think.
All right, so this one question is a question I love to ask every time I have the opportunity to do so, and it's about the credibility of governments in Africa as we speak. Now, the Tanzanian government has said that it wants to use this revenue it is hoping to generate from this new introduction to improve infrastructure and, of course, to bring about better service delivery in the country. So how well can Tanzanians trust the government to ensure that these revenues that will be gotten will be reinvested into the Tanzanian economy?
That's a very good question. As you know, Tanzania heavily borrowed in the last 2 years. They're now trying to reconfigure their borrowing and get cheaper borrowing from the IMF and the World Bank. So there is an awareness of the cost of borrowing. They've got some very bold infrastructure plans, which they're trying to execute at the moment. But, this is a challenge with all our governments, really. And, the difference between having an intelligent, joined-up government which spends the money wisely and one that doesn't is huge. And the cost can be penal. Look at what happened in Zambia under President Lungu. It was as if money was dropping from the sky. They blew it all, and now the new Zambian government is having to fix that problem. So for countries of our size on the continent, your point is well made. You really need the government to be intelligent, to be joined up in its thinking, and to be making wise decisions and not blowing all the cash in a splurge. So yes, there we rely on the ability of our leadership. And that's a tough call at times, I have to admit.
Now, talking about leadership and their intelligence, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development Inclusive Framework on Base Erosion and Profit Shifting championed a global tax agreement, which some countries like Kenya and Nigeria have actually opted out of. Now, do you think Tanzania would also follow that suit to opt out of that particular scheme?
I think it's a mistake to opt out of that scheme, and I think the Tanzanians will be keener to stay within it. I would be surprised if they opt out. I think, Kenya and Nigeria made a mistake in opting out of that. I think you're far better off being within that system.
Why would you say so? Why would you say that those who opted out made a mistake?
I think they made a mistake because obviously they're trying to keep more policy-making optionality, but net, you're going to international money, your own money that's coming from your remittances, from your people who are living abroad, which has become such an important amount, and your local investors. Everybody's looking for a level playing field. And, if you keep that policy optionality, typically what it means is that your governments start overtaxing as opposed to undertaxing. So it's a way of disciplining and keeping everything in line. And I think that's the important issue for me.
Oh, but then those against the OECD deal agree that it limits the amount taxable for foreign companies, based on what obtains within their climb and what obtains in their country. So do you also agree to this particular stance?
Yeah, well, yes, I do. Look, I think, it's a fiendishly complicated issue. The corporates are always trying to escape paying tax. And what you really need to do is have I think as long as you have an intelligent tax department that is not overreaching itself and understands business, then you're going to be able to stay within the confines of that OECD framework and collect more tax. So, I think revenue authorities, should be cognizant of the international environment and seek to be aligned with tax rates globally, as opposed to introducing arbitrary tax rates, which typically or inevitably are higher than the global norm.
Okay, so finally, Aly Khan, would you advocate that other African countries should adopt the digital service tax system that some other countries, some other African countries are now embracing now? Because we're talking about generating revenue, improving the economy, both in Africa and, of course, extending it to other climes. So would you support this particular trend?
Yeah, yes, I would. I'd support it, but I'd also say to them is keep the tax so low that it's insignificant, which is like 1.5%. This is a cherry on your GDP cake. Treat it like that. It's going to grow at tremendous speeds if you allow it to. It can even turn exponential, and it's going to create opportunities for your young people, and which is the biggest challenge for each African country that I can think of. So yes, I think keep it fair, stay in line, and really nurture this part of the economy because it's got the most potential of all.
All right, so that's a big thumbs up from Aly Khan Satchu for digital service tax. But then thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So the new call from the Tanzanian ministry to introduce a digital service tax comes amidst efforts at the global level to restructure the global tax system so as to enable governments collect their fair share of taxes in a changing global economy. So we quickly run off on this break, and when we return, we get to bring you NC4 to watch. Don't go away. On NC4 to watch, let's start by telling you that Mozambique has announced plans to establish a sovereign wealth fund later this year as it prepares to start natural gas exports aimed at generating $96 billion of revenue for the country. Finance Minister Max Tonello says authorities are in the process of finalizing draft legislation that will govern the management of the fund, which is expected to be operational before Mozambique's first liquefied natural gas exports begin to flow by October. Now, Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa said banks and companies involved in local currency manipulation and unjustifiable increases in the prices of foods and goods, including services, could lose their operating license, according to a report by a state media outlet. The government has identified the entities responsible with the president saying the administration is devising methods to deal with those banks and companies, and the plans will be announced in due course. Now, Kenya has allocated 471 million Kenyan shillings to the stalled cooking gas subsidy scheme for the new financial year starting July, with the amount set to be raised to 820 million Kenyan shillings in the next financial year. This marks a 203% rise compared with the current financial year, where 155 million Kenyan shillings had been allocated. And finally, Italy's CNI has signed a deal to increase gas supplies from the Congo Republic by more than 4.5 billion cubic meters a year, the energy group said on Thursday. The deal is the latest Italian move to reduce dependence on Russian gas, with Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio and Ecology Transition Minister Roberto Cingolani leading an Italian delegation to Angola and the Congo Republic this week to line up LNG contracts. And that's it on today's edition of Business Edge. You can visit our social media platforms at New Central TV. You can also visit our website, www.newcentral.africa, and also download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store, because we have so much for you there that you can engage yourself with. My name is Lekan Onabanjo. See you next time. Enjoy a fruitful and a wonderful week.